In a world of one-song soundtrack albums, the quest for the definitive collection of celluloid sing-alongs is over. Box Office Bombs, a new compilation of explosive cinematic hits from K-Smell Records. Hits like Loading Zone by Lenny Noggins. We've assembled over half a century's worth of big tunes from the big screen. Everything from driving rock to lush ballads, like this one from Barbar Stipend and Ryan Adams.
This is it. Oh, I finally found someone to share my life.
Aspirational music from aspirational movies.
Horizon underneath the blazing skies. Tell me where the eagles flying higher and higher. Will it be a man in motion?
25 tunes from 20 movies, all remastered, remixed, re-recorded, and run through a film projector. True movie music. This is a limited time offer that only comes around once in a lifetime. Order Box Office Bombs by sending check, cash, money order, credit cards, and catalytic converters to
Box Office Bombs, P.O. Box 1564, Worms, Nebraska 90125. Again, that's Box Office Bombs, P.O. Box 1564, Worms, Nebraska 90125. For fastest delivery, eat a bran muffin and drink a cup of bad coffee. Order today! And welcome to a grand, sweeping, majestic, widescreen, but no more widescreen than usual, edition of the Oddity Archive. And in case you haven't gotten all the hints so far, yeah, finally, after years in development purgatory, if you will, it's finally time for record ripoffs at the movies, which rather disappointingly is really similar to just a normal old everyday record ripoffs episode. Oh well. Anyway, this is a sort of a noteworthy episode, movies aside, in that this is the first time that I've ever been able to kind of widen the time scope, the net, if you will. So I got albums for you from 3 decades, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, and if you factor in the compositions, we're talking 5 decades worth of tunes here, so yeah, a little progress. But anyway, we got 5 albums to cover, so let's get down to business. And I actually want to bookend today's episode with a couple of releases from Madison. And of course, Madison was the Canadian company that mostly specialized in cheapy, bargain bin, oftentimes public domain VHS, some DVD a little later on. But they did put out a few albums. And to the best of my knowledge, every last one of them is a knockoff. I don't think they ever put out anything original. So with that, to kick things off here, from 1995, it's What's on the Box today. Love Songs from the Movies. Which is a bit of a misnomer. I'd say maybe about half of these are love songs. And you'd think, okay, well maybe it's all ballads. No, there's some mid and up-tempo stuff here too. It was just a lazy title. Would you expect anything more out of Madison? So anyway, a few years ago, I covered a trio of these Madison movie album sort of deals. But those, a lot of times, those songs were written for a movie, but they very soon transcended the movie. In this case, a good chunk of these were already at least somewhat well known prior to whatever movie. But like the stuff I already covered, it soon transcended the movies.
Pain in my head, oh, I'd rather be dead. Oh, I don't know what I'm gonna do, 'cause I know I've come to the end of the road,
All those times tonight when you just heard me and just ran out with that other fella. Baby, I knew about it. I just didn't care. You just don't understand how much I love you, do you?
Oh, she may be weary, and young girls, they do get weary. It's not just sentimental, no, no. All you gotta do is try a little tenderness. Try a little tenderness. Yeah, yeah. Oh, my love. I need your love. It must have been love, but it's over now. It must have been gold. It was all that I wanted. Now giving without. When I fall in love, it will be completely, or I'll never fall in love with you.
Every now and then, I make an archive episode that just seems to be cursed. And this is proving to be one of those episodes. And that really enthuses me as to what the rest of the production of this is going to look like. But if you're seeing this, something must have gone right enough to get this over the finish line. So anyway, sometimes just everything that can go wrong does go wrong. And in this case, it started right out of the gate. The first day I was working on this, I was just trying to screen albums, figure out what I was going to cover. And I had a little stack of LPs. And as I was playing one of them, I've been playing around with vinyl since I was like 9 years old. And in all this time, I've never had a stylus just buckle on me, but that's exactly what happened. And so $65 later, I got another stylus, and it's been okay so far. I didn't have time to break it in or anything, but it doesn't really matter for this kind of stuff. So anyway, on another note, sometimes with these episodes, I just struggle with the material, and I've been struggling with it here. There's just been this kind of weird, depressing undercurrent to a lot of it, which is especially strange given that there's plenty of mid and up-tempo stuff in this episode. But this next album is emblematic of the whole experience here. I have no reason to find this depressing. There are no sad songs on here. There's only one ballad. It's not a depressing one. Everything else is mid to up-tempo general rock and pop stuff. But it's just been kind of eating at me. So anyway, with that, today's next album turned out to be today's only slab of vinyl. And that would be not the original soundtrack to FM, as performed by Studio 78. Because, 1978. Now, before you ask, yes, I have covered another FM, not the original soundtrack, but that was from Pickwick. This thing is from Springboard. This is a completely different crack at it. And this is the first time I've ever done a Springboard album on Record Ripoffs. I've got a handful of them, but I just never covered them because, as far as knockoffs go, they're inoffensive. You know, they're not bad enough to be funny, and they're not kind of weirdly, perversely, inversely good either. So they just fall through the cracks. But this thing is far and away the worst one I've heard out of them. And so, getting back to the Pickwick one that I covered several years ago, that one was noteworthy for the main singer on it. It was the same guy singing most of the tunes, and he sounded like a weird, drunk, pervy uncle. Well, as far as I can tell, there are no weird, drunk, pervy uncles on this thing, at least on the vocal front. But it's on the instrumental front where this thing kind of fails. And I really have to put the spotlight of shame on whoever the keyboardist was here. Weird drifting tempos and really rotten synthesizer work, inappropriate sort of playing styles for whatever tune. It's just a mess.
Hurry the battle, mama. It's grapefruit wine. The girls don't seem to care what's on. No static at all. Static at all. FM, no static at all.
People try to rape me, always think I'm crazy, make me burn the candle right down. Those high-heel women with the no-gun games, cheating like I don't know how. Baby, get it straight, got to roll it, tumble and die.
He don't miss the boat that day he left the shack, but that was all he missed. He ain't come back. One more for the road. He don't. Whoa. One more for the road. You're as cold as ice. You're willing to sacrifice our love. You're as cold as ice.
But hear a boy make a big noise playing in the street, gonna be a big man someday. You got mud on your face, you big disgrace. We will rock you.
Well, today's first album was from the 90s. Today's second album was from the 70s. So today's third album must be from the 90s, cashing in on a movie from the 70s. And so, with that, I don't think it would be record ripoffs at the movies without a knockoff of what has to be the all time most famous pop music movie soundtrack album. And that would be at least a knockoff of Saturday Night Fever. And here's the knockoff that we're covering. It's from 1997 and complete with clip art artwork. But anyway, I'm going to have to be perfectly blunt with you here. Madison stuff notwithstanding, I tend to not really like dealing with 90s record ripoff stuff because by that point, a little thing called MIDI had happened, musical instrument digital interface. Digital recording had become much more commonplace, and worst of all, certainly by the late 90s, a little thing called quantization had happened. And if you're not familiar, at its simplest, it's snapping notes to a grid, tightening up a performance, fixing botched notes and all. Well, that kind of sucks the fun out of it to me. I'd much rather hear real musicians actually playing and whatever bad notes they hit just stay in there. So, all too often with this 90s stuff that I find, it comes down to the vocals. Well, bad vocals are the only thing this sucker has going for it.
Baby moves in me like my woman take me higher. My woman keep me warm. What you doing in your bed tonight? You should be dancing, yeah. Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk. I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. We can try to understand. New York Times don't make a man. Whether you're a brother or whether you're a mother, you're staying alive, staying alive. Ha, 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 staying alive, staying alive. Ha, 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 staying alive. Just talking, telling me lies, yeah. Just talking, telling me lies, yeah. Just talking, just getting you right. Night fever, we know how to do it. Feels like forever, baby, don't you? In the night fever, we know how to show it. Oh, you know it, baby, don't you?
I wanna do it till the sun comes up. Oh yeah. I wanna put on my boogie shoes. Just boogie with you.
All right, we've done 90s, we've done 70s, we've done 70s by way of the 90s. Let's finally get to today's one and only bit of 80s goodness. So I picked up a, as it turned out, reduced down cassette version of this thing on a thrifting episode not too long ago. And I ended the episode with a bit of one of the tunes, and I will reprise that tune here. But I mentioned in that episode that it seemed like I had it already. It just seemed familiar. And, well, sure enough, I already had it on CD, and that cassette was cut down to about 35 to 40 minutes. The original CD that it was on was about an hour. And that CD was a viewer donation. Came to me about 2 years ago now. So with that, our next album, and again, our only 80s thing today, is supposedly from 1986. This thing is called Hot Movie Hits, as performed by the Beat Street Band, and it comes to us by way of the Special Music Company. Sometimes the jokes just write themselves, don't they? Well, I said supposedly 1986 because unless they rush released this thing right at the end of the year, I think that date is wrong. I think they just carried over 1986 to an 87 release. I don't know why I'm going on this little rant, but just stick with me here. One of the tunes on here only got released in October, last week of October of 86, hit the charts in December, and I don't think hit its peak until a little bit into the new year. So, yeah, bad clerical work on their part. And that's kind of indicative of the whole thing. It's a nice looking package for the time, certainly, the early CDs and all. And some of the covers on here are surprisingly solid. There are decent covers of tunes from Berlin and Madonna on here. And it runs all the way down to some of the most atrocious covers that I've covered on Record Ripoffs to date.
The power of love is a curious thing. Make one man weep, make another man sing. It don't take money, it don't take fame. Don't even cut it card to ride this train. Strong and certain, cool sometimes.
There she goes and knows I'm dying when she says, "Who is Johnny? Who's Johnny?" She says, and smiled in her special way. "Who's Johnny?" She says, "You know I love you." Who's Johnny? She says, and smiled in her special way.
When the going gets tough, the tough get going. When the going gets tough, the tough get on me, yeah.
Darling, I'll climb any mountain. Darling, I'll do anything. Ooh, when the going gets tough. You broke a boy in me, but you won't break a man. I see a new horizon underneath the blazing skies. Tell me where the eagles flying higher and higher. I can hear the music playing, I can see the banners fly. Realize you're bad again, I hop high and high. Gonna be a man in motion, all the need is a pair of wheels. Running down the road, dancing to a different drum. The light of tomorrow is right where we are. There's no turning back. Really when I feel again. Shine your light on me. You want the magic ring. I just called to say I love you.
As promised, we're bookending today's episode with Madison releases. And in spite of my gripes about 90s knockoff albums earlier, although I guess I made a caveat for Madison stuff, this is the most recent one of the bunch. This thing is from 1997. Now, I picked this one up, like some of today's other albums, on a thrifting episode, and this was on the Halloween one last October, which is appropriate. Now, there's no horror movie music covers on this thing, but it's a horror show. This thing is easily the worst album we're covering today. So with that, again, from 1997, it's The Best of Movie Hits Volume 2. as performed by the Starlight Orchestra and Singers. And that's a total lie. There is no such thing as the Starlight Orchestra and Singers. It's just whatever hacks contributed to whatever other Madison stuff. The only orchestra you're going to hear on here is like string synthesizer, that sort of thing. And to just put this in greater perspective, 2 of the songs on this CD already appeared on the cassette at the beginning of today's episode.
I see a little silhouette of a man. Scaramouche, Scaramouche, when you do the van.
Hold it, stranger.
New dance! It's an old dance, come back again. Run, go tell your friend. It's a brand new design. Oh, say, man, you know what really drive me crazy? Oh, man, you know what really drive me mad? So watch them whiny girls roll them back on me, make them bump, 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 good boy, feel glad. Watch me now. Hey! Push it out, girl.
I know all there is to know about the crying game. Don't want no more of this crying game. Don't want no more. Easy come, easy go. Will you let me go? Bismillah, no. Let you go, let it go. Smoke on the water and fire in the sky. Smoke on the water. Beelzebub has a devil put aside for me, for me. Have you seen my childhood? I'm searching for the world that I come from. Have you seen my childhood?
Rather famously / infamously, the first 4 regular archive episodes way back in 2012 featured this little thing called Senses Working Overtime as its theme tune, and it was from this little cult band called XTC. Well, not too terribly long ago on one of my thrifting episodes, seems to be a theme today, I picked up this knockoff CD, and I didn't discuss it in the episode, but I mostly picked it up because it appeared to have an XTC cover on it, and just the very notion of knockoff XTC was enough to get me to pick it up, of course. So, as it turns out, it's done as an instrumental, and it's based on a cover of the XTC tune. And no, it's not, since it's working overtime. But anyway, to close things out today, over the end credits, I want to play a bit of that song. And it's from this album. Themes from, of all things, The Lion King and other movie hits. It's from 1995, allegedly done by the American Film Orchestra. If your idea of an orchestra is a synthesizer, then yeah, an orchestra. But anyway, getting back to the XTC thing, the song is The Ballad of Peter Pumpkinhead. but it's based on the version by the Crash Test Dummies, which appeared on the soundtrack to that true cinematic classic, Dumb and Dumber. Well, if nothing else, I learned the hard way that XTC tunes don't really function well as instrumentals.